I've been saying lately, like, I'm really enjoying outlining this book because it's really tightly plotted. And then I'm like, what does that even mean?
This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. This week, the tables have turned, and Alida and I will be talking about some fun little pieces of craft that we don't always get to talk about because they may not take up a whole episode. So we're going to dive into some definitions, some what, whys, and hows, and I'm going to turn the table on Alida and ask her all the questions because developmental editor as she is, she should have all the answers, right, Alida? All the answers.
Yeah. I feel like I'm in the hot seat, like you're about to stump me. I know, it's terrible. I'm nervous.
No, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Are you sure?
Yes. So I just wanted to bring some of these to our conversation because sometimes I feel like as writers, we throw terminology around and maybe haven't really thought about maybe the deeper meaning or the way that they apply to our craft. So the first one I'm going to throw at you is my book is super tightly plotted. What does that mean? What does it mean to have a tightly plotted book?
Yeah. Well, okay, first off, little caveat here is I don't use a lot of these words.
Yeah.
So that's not something I say to clients or use to describe my own book. But I would think if a story is tightly plotted, then not only is it more plot driven than character driven, but the plot doesn't slow down. It's crafted in such a way that we're constantly moving through the turns in the plot and the escalation of stakes and tension in the plot.
Yes.
Without any detours, without like going into relationships or subplots and sort of taking a break from that main plot. People might throw that phrase out and just mean, I did a great job. It's really tight. It's well done. Yes. That could just be what people mean by tightly plotted. But I'm thinking if it's loose, there's space. And if it's tight, there's not space. So definitely. How I would use the term would be to describe a type of plot.
Yeah. And I feel like this is something I've been messing around with in my own stuff. And I agree with you. It's very much like I don't have a lot of extraneous things happening that although they would tie in, maybe don't tie in right away or, have these almost more expansive subplots and things. It's more like everything is directly related to the main plot so tightly that it's pretty obvious, right? We don't have sidebars that take a while to come back in. So,
right. And I think too, it might also mean that you can't poke holes in it if it's tightly plotted, so if you're analyzing a plot, you can't find mistakes or missteps in the way the plot is crafted, especially if you think of the mystery genre or maybe a thriller where every little aspect of the plot is critical to the way the story turns out and the way it evolves or revolves around plot points. And so the choices the protagonist makes and all of those aspects of character agency really, fit into the plot neatly and become those little hinges on which the plot turns. So that would be another way we might use tightly plotted. And that might be the best way that we've talked about so far. I
like that. Yeah. I like using the mystery genre as an example there because it's really easy to see how they weave everything together. So,
right.
Okay. Speaking of plot holes. Okay. There's another one that people throw out a lot. I found a plot hole, or there's a plot hole here, or fix that plot hole. What is a plot hole and how can we identify them and fix them?
I also, again, it's a term I don't actually use.
I love it. You know what? That's good though, because I like
stumping me.
No, because I feel like it's in the general atmosphere, but like the fact that you as an editor don't use it very often means that it's really more of like a jargony term rather than something that's actually like something you should be examining your work for.
Right. Yes. And, I come from a traditional background through an MFA program. And as a teacher and developmental editor and writing coach, I have lots of experience with this. So I wonder if plot hole is maybe one of those terms that has crossed over from the film industry into more writers' general vocabulary. So, I think if you're going to put me on the spot, Kathryn,
which I am,
I think of that tightly knit plot sweater having a hole in it. And you're like, oh, shoot, this weave is no longer tight. I can see through a gap in the stitches. There's a mistake here. Basically, it's a mistake. And so if you were, graphing your plot arc and sort of putting all the events of your story onto a timeline, when you hit a plot hole, that's where it falls apart. You've dropped your stitches, thinking of that nice plot sweater we knit tightly.
So what kind of mistakes do you see frequently from your writers?
Plot?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, stakes and tension are not escalating appropriately. Things don't make sense. So a character makes a choice that doesn't drive the plot forward, but kind of gets us stuck. We talk about the soggy middle problem. So that's when your plot kind of hits a plateau. So that's something I see. Lack of agency. The plot seems to be moving along event after event after event, but it's all stuff that's happening instead of things the character is causing to happen or responding to, which then causes a new thing. So you need to think of your plot as a chain of cause and effect, or action, reaction. And sometimes your character is acting and sometimes your character is reacting. And so you keep sort of making your way through the plot events with that agency. So the lack of agency is a big problem that I see. And any of those issues can create a plot hole.
Right.
But, I wouldn't say, oh, here's a plot hole. I would say, here's a problem where you don't have agency, or where your stakes stopped escalating, or you're spending too much time on a subplot and we're losing our focus that's really driving the story.
Okay. Yeah. I think sometimes when I think of a plot hole, I think of something that the author didn't think about, but that is so glaringly obvious to the reader or to the viewer that would have changed the scenario or fixed it earlier, that sort of a thing. Have you seen much of that kind of, it lends itself to like a Deus Ex Machina type ending where it's all of a sudden the author just pulls things together because they didn't like weave it properly. Does that make sense? So like your hole in your plot is actually like a logic problem or a world problem where you've written yourself out of something that maybe didn't actually work the way you were hoping that it should.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I don't know if I've seen a lot of that. I wonder if this term plot hole goes back to the mystery genre. Right. Like if you have Mrs. White do it in the drawing room with the candlestick, but then, the candlestick was locked up in the butler's pantry and nobody could have used the candlestick. You've created
a plot hole,
which is that kind of logic issue you're talking about. And so the reader can see the mistake you've made, but maybe you're so in the weeds with all the different aspects of your story.
Right.
That you've missed it. You've missed the fact that,
And this is why you have editing. Hopefully you catch all those things before you send it out into the world. Good. Okay. Moving forward at a quick clip with our fast-paced novels.
We're trotting along with our knitting needles.
Right, exactly. Click, 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 click. This book is so fast-paced, or this book is really slow-paced and leisurely. Like, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, well, part of it is how action driven is it? And I don't mean plot driven, I mean action driven and suspense. Are you reading it with a real eagerness to see what happens next? Right? Or are you reading it and luxuriating in the prose or in the character study or in the descriptions of the setting and the mood? And so I think when people talk about fast versus slow pace, what they're really talking about is a sense of eagerness, which is different from a sense of pleasure.
Right.
Right.
Right. We're not physically talking about how quickly you can turn the pages, but it's going to feel like that in your brain, right? It's like, how fast can I get to the end? Because I really want to know, right? More so than this relishing that moment and that time.
Yeah. Yes. And just to your point about how quick you can turn the pages, having a lot of white space because you're writing in dialogue all the time does not make for a quickly paced story.
No, yeah. You still need your narrative to be driving the pace of your story.
Exactly. Yes.
All right. Speaking of narrative, another topic or thing that I hear thrown around a lot is make sure you're writing in active voice. Use your active voice. And sometimes I think that can get confused with action or using your voice. So what is active voice versus maybe voice itself?
Yeah, so when we talk about active voice, we're really talking about your sentences syntax. And I can almost see writers' brains working as they are constructing their sentences, because they will say something like, the coat was lying on the floor where John dropped it when he came into the house. And so you've got the coat, which is an inanimate object, as the subject of the sentence. And then you've got John, who's an animate person and a doer, way at the end of your sentence, just in this very passive role of kind of existing. So, okay, you're seeing this scene in your mind, and for whatever reason, you start with the setting and then you say, oh yeah, by the way, John's the one who threw the coat on the floor. No. We want this active. John burst into the room and threw that coat down.
Right.
Give it some person in action, right? That sense of movement, forward momentum, and pick some nice verbs. If you are saying was a lot, that is a huge tip off that your prose needs to be strengthened.
Yeah. I like that's a very simple way to analyze your work and make sure you're in an active voice without having to like diagram sentences.
Yes. Yeah. And, just quick plug here. 1, maybe 2, StoryWorks writing tips ago, I talked about that tip of watching out for was or is or were and are, right? That to be verb and all of its conjugations, and gave some sentence examples. So folks, make sure you listen to the writing tips on the off weeks between the roundtable.
I'll even link it into the show's show notes for you, so you can just go to one place. Not that it's more than one website, so you can just go to one place anyway.
It is one page on the website with all of the writing tips. So it's so easy.
Feel free to just click through and listen to your heart's content. Lots of good stuff in there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a new session of fiction group coaching beginning soon. This is a special opportunity for writers with a solid grasp of novel writing who are ready to greatly improve their writing skills in a small group of peers with me as your mentor. Each session is 3 months with biweekly calls. Group size is limited, so every member gets time each call to address their storycraft questions and discuss their work in progress. Writers in last year's coaching group have been amazed by the progress they make in their novels by having the chance to solve problems as they go, instead of waiting for a full draft edit. The amount of support, encouragement, and accountability is immense. If you've got a work in progress, a manuscript getting musty in a drawer, or a completed draft with some problem spots you'd like to dive into, all while becoming a better writer through mentorship and peer support, make sure you look into fiction group coaching. Go to www.wordessential.com/editing/coach. While you're there, send me a message and let me know you would like to set up a 15-minute discovery call. I can't wait to see you in the new session of Fiction Group Coaching.
All right. So next, I have the lie or the wound of your main character, or maybe main characters if you use it for multiple characters and their journeys.
Right. So again, not words I really use, but I do talk about the fatal flaw. Mm-hmm. So I like that term, fatal flaw, because, lie, okay, so probably over the course of a character arc, we want our character to discover some sort of truth, hopefully to grow and evolve. Wound has maybe a slight victim edge to it. Flaw like lie, there's something you need to overcome. And the fatal flaw is that one that's buried, that's suppressed and repressed, that is affecting our character's psychology, which drives the character's choices, right? Which gets into agency and how our character interacts with other characters and all of those other things. So if it's the lie, and this idea that they believe something about themselves that's not true. I mean, you could break it down. It can be great, but I think those are all just synonyms for the fatal flaw. And what we're talking about is something in your character's development that is not on the surface of the page, but that may or may not be discovered by the character, should be sensed by the reader, whether you are explicit at some point in your narrative or implicit, right? Like, let's say your protagonist was adopted at some point in early childhood. They might have an abandonment issue. Well, how does that play out? Maybe they have trouble trusting in personal relationships and are a bit of a loner. So that drives all sorts of choices. How much you need that on the page in a given story just depends on the story. Yeah.
And I think this one comes up for me a lot because a lot of character development sheets, as you're working through your character, a lot of them will have a question on there that says what is the lie that your character believes? And I think it's too simplistic to just put that on there and expect everyone to know what you're trying to get at. And I love fatal flaw so much more for me personally, but I think every writer kind of approaches that in a different, as long as you have the right mentality of my character has something that they're going to have to work through, that I'm working with my character arc so that they develop through this, right? And so I think sometimes it can be really confusing to be looking at this question and say, what's the lie my character believes? Well, for me, that doesn't work. I don't think that way.
Right. Yeah. So have you tried to answer that question when you're doing those worksheets, or do you skip it?
I skip it most of the time. And the reason is because I would sit there and come up with some artificial manufactured lie. And that's not really what they're getting at. That's not really what they want you to do. And for my characters, I don't think in terms of their, the thing that they're telling themselves that isn't actually true, or the thing that they're believing that isn't actually true. It's more like that internal problem that they have to overcome or work through. And so I don't articulate it in a way that is well, this is false. It's more like they need to grow through this. And that's the way I approach it. Because I think we all have things we need to grow through, or change about ourselves, or grow past, or mature, however, whatever language works best for you. And maybe it is a wound and you need to heal, right? Or you need to, repair a relationship, whatever that is. But I think just simplifying it down to what's their wound or what's their lie leaves a lot of stuff off the table for an author to think about in terms of their character development. So that one bothers me more so than some of the other ones. And I just hope people don't get caught.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And I think fatal flaw works. I'm partial to it. But if you like thinking about the wound or the lie, maybe say wound / lie / fatal flaw, so that your perspective opens up and you realize it can be, multiple ways of addressing the same issue in your character's development. Yeah.
Yeah. And I tend to work my characters from their motivation backwards into their flaw. Like, why would they be motivated? What happened to them? What is something that would drive them into this role that I've given them, right? And that's, I think, why at the lie or the wound doesn't work so well for me as like what's driving them, and then how is that something that they need to work through in order to reach the climax. So I think, again, to each their own in terms of being able to develop it. Just don't get caught in the trap
right.
of language, when really what we're trying to get at is character development. So
sage advice.
Well, and that's why I wanted to talk about some of these, because I feel like sometimes we just throw these words around, and people, especially newer authors or writers, can be like, wait, what? I need to have a what? I need to do what? And there's just a lot of good information out there, but there's also just a lot of jargon or people expecting people to understand when maybe they don't fully understand.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, then don't you start going, well, what's my lie? What lie am I telling myself? Oh my God. I'm so confused now.
Right. Awesome. Okay. Another one that shows up sometimes on character sheets, and that you use as well. And it's a good thing to think about, but that might be confusing when first encountered, is what is your character's role in their story, or what role in the story? Can you talk about role for a little bit?
Yes. So we all have a role in the plot, right? So if you think about your protagonist, your antagonist, and they're heading toward some sort of epic clash in the climax, your protagonist is going to have to fulfill certain roles and do certain things on the way to that climax, which is going to shape the skills and qualities that you use to define your character, right? So if you need your character to be a detective, you might need somebody who's observant and detail-oriented and has a lot of thinking skills, a lot of sort of reasoning out, if this, then that, here are the possibilities, these are the variables I need to factor into this. So it's not just like, well, you've got to have chase scenes and run really fast, or you've got to know how to handle a gun. It's also the kind of personality traits that go into that, so it's multi-layered. And if you have multiple supporting characters and people need to work as a team, then you're going to start thinking, well, who do I need on my team? Do I need a computer specialist? Do I need a researcher? Do I need somebody with, great physical prowess? And how many of those roles can one character fulfill? Can I have somebody who's a, computer person with physical prowess, or does that need to be two different characters, and why? And so part of developing your cast of characters is going to be dependent on the roles you need them to fulfill.
Yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of times when I think role, I don't think about their skill set and what needs to happen. And so I think the word for me just conjures, oh, are they the protagonist? Are they the antagonist? Are they the and so when I see those questions, I get stumped, because I'm like, well, this is the main character. What other role does she have? But looking at it from skills and things like that just changes the question and makes it much more useful to think about, rather than just giving them a label. Right.
Right. Have you seen Umbrella Academy?
I have not. It's on my watch list, but I have not watched it yet.
Okay. All right. Can I give you a little bit of a spoiler?
Yeah, I
don't
give
give
you
too much of a spoiler
at all.
Okay. So Vanya, I mean, it's an ensemble cast, but Vanya is at the center of this cast, and they're, weird superheroes. And Vanya is the normal one who's always been overlooked and neglected and who doesn't fit into the family because she doesn't have any powers. So what she does do is she plays violin. Well, eventually we discover that she has powers, but they were being suppressed by medication that her father put her on. So unbeknownst to her and everyone else, she actually has powers. And those powers are triggered by her emotional states. So why is Vanya, who needs to discover her powers when they're triggered through emotional states, play the violin? Why is that part of her character?
Are you asking me, the musician?
Well, you are a musician, Kathryn. I expect you to get this.
Music is how we tap into our emotional selves.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. If she were a secretary or a computer IT person, or even like working in a science lab or whatever, or a mathematician, how would we show our readers this change in her through emotion? So we see her playing technically very skilled, but she's like way at the back of the orchestra.
Right.
And then when something happens, we see her body come alive while she's playing there. We hear the difference in the music, and we feel that expression through the playing of the violin.
Right.
Right. So even just with something that's not so obvious.
Yeah.
Right. It's intentional, and it's carefully chosen to fit her ultimate role in the story.
Very cool. Yes. Intentional from the beginning, things that I have to build in after I've already started, but yes.
Right. Yeah.
Edit back in.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So if you've got Vanya serving coffee in the local diner, you've got to go back and rewrite that.
Missed an opportunity, so let's fix that now. Yes,
exactly. Go put an instrument in her hands. Yes.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay. Well, that was the end of my list, I think, for this time around. So anything else we want to?
How'd I do? What's my score?
I give you a 10 out of 10.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.